When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Ah yes, the magnificent Trolley Sourbright Crawler, also known as Trollicus brightolus. The worm's captivating neon colour makes it an easy gummy prey.
Trolley!
It's a surprisingly sour, invitingly chewy, staggeringly snackable species unlike anything else found on this planet.
Eat me!
Delicious. Visit trolley.com to shop now.
Trolley, eat me!
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
Without turning on the light, I climbed on top of the toilet and sink to peek out the top of the window. I audibly gasped at what I saw.
I looked over to the window, and my heart skipped a beat. A mysterious figure immediately moved out of my line of vision, and I saw that the window was cracked open about 4 inches.
From Killer Podcasts. True tales of horror, bizarre happenings, unexplainable events. This is Disturbed. Hello, and welcome back to the show. This week, we're bringing you 3 stories that will make you hide under the covers at night. So sit back, listen closely, and dive into the horror. First, a story narrated by Kat Carter, submitted by Disturbed listener Isabel, about a neighbor who got a little too friendly.
This story takes place a few years ago when I was 26 and my son Theo was 5. After a messy divorce, we relocated far away to get a fresh start. Our new home had a new problem, however, and his name was Todd. Todd lived in the house directly behind us, and we practically shared a backyard. The only thing separating our properties was a white picket fence. Todd was a well-kept man with great hygiene, and he dressed in the classic, almost stereotypical manner of an older gentleman, with plaid button-down shirts tucked neatly into his khaki pants, secured with a leather belt. On multiple occasions, I would come out to check on Theo playing in the backyard, and I would see Todd sitting down in the grass right next to the fence, whispering to him, suggesting that he wanted to keep his conversation private. This unsettled me, but initially I just told myself he was being friendly. After a couple weeks had passed, I started seeing random gifts pop up next to the fence. Cars, dinosaurs, and candy would appear with a sticky note attached saying Theo in big bold letters with a smiley face. This only increased the uneasy feeling I had about Todd. I made sure to firmly tell Theo that he wasn't allowed to accept any gifts from Todd, but the gifts continued to appear for months. After the first 2 or 3 weeks, I confronted Todd and asked him to stop, but he just slammed the door in my face without so much as uttering a word. Months passed, and every time the gifts appeared, I would throw them away immediately. Soon, the number of gifts decreased. I tried to keep Theo inside as much as possible, but of course, he always wanted to play outside in the backyard. One day in particular, I tried to coax Theo into playing inside for the day, but he kept begging to go outside and play in the sandbox. Reluctantly, I agreed, but I kept a close eye on him. I had housework to do, so instead of sitting outside with him, I'd just check on him every now and then. An hour passed, and Theo's playtime had gone completely uninterrupted, so I let my guard down, which I deeply regret. After about 20 minutes, I went back outside and saw Theo in the sandpit. But he was not alone. Todd was there. He was sitting in the pit with Theo on his lap. But Theo had no pants on, just his underwear and shirt. I gasped and ran over to them, screaming. I yelled at Todd, asking what he was doing with my son. He claimed that they were just playing and that Theo kept getting sand all over his pants, so he thought it would be better to take them off. I was appalled and demanded he leave immediately. I picked up my son and put him on my hip as I ran inside, locking the sliding glass door behind me. I watched as Todd stood up, unfazed by what just happened. He began climbing the fence and managed to get over with little difficulty. I stood there, paralyzed, unsure of what to do. For God knows what reason, I ended up not calling the police. But I did ban Theo from going outside and instructed him to inform me if Todd ever appeared. Everything was quiet for 2 or 3 weeks, until one night when I abruptly awoke to a large rustling sound outside. Being the paranoid person I am, I went to check on Theo, just in case. I opened his door, and since he sleeps with a bright nightlight, I could clearly see he was lying in bed, sound asleep. But there was an unsettling chill in the room. I looked over to the window, and my heart skipped a beat. A mysterious figure immediately moved out of my line of vision, and I saw that the window was cracked open about 4 inches. I distinctly remembered making sure all the windows were closed because I hate when I wake up and it's freezing. Without hesitation, I grabbed my son, put him in my bed, and called the police, who arrived in 10 minutes. They thoroughly searched around the perimeter of the house, but couldn't find anything, not even a footprint. With no proof, they couldn't take the case any further. Theo slept in my room that night. He wasn't aware of what was happening, and I wanted to keep it that way. I locked all the doors, but the windows in my house do not lock because we installed cheap locks when we first moved in, and well, we got our money's worth. The next morning, I refused to let Theo sit in the backyard. He was upset, but I held firm. I needed to prioritize his safety over his disappointment. So he played in his room for most of the day. At some point in the evening, he came up to me with a box I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. My heart sank. The box was full of tons and tons of photos. Some were of us moving in months ago. Some were of Theo in the backyard. But most were of Theo lying in his bed asleep. I told him to go to his room and I reported it to the police. They took the matter more seriously this time. They acquired a warrant to search Todd's house after I insisted he was responsible. In his house, they found even more pictures of my son scattered around. What they did not find was Todd. He was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the house had no signs of anybody ever living there. The beds were made, the fridge was completely bare, and the bathroom had no supplies, not even shampoo. There wasn't a single trace of Todd. The police investigated for a little while longer, but never found anything. Shortly after this, my son and I moved away, and we never heard from Todd again. Years have passed, and though Theo has grown up with only faint, hazy memories of those unsettling times, I still wonder about Todd. Did he ever truly vanish, or is he lurking somewhere else, watching someone else from the shadows?
This next story comes from Reddit user Clara O. Ellis and is narrated by Catherine Restivo. I think my house is haunted.
This may seem insane or delusional, but it's all true. I've never stopped thinking about it since it happened, and I can't stop wondering about it. In 2021, my partner and I moved into our current house, which we're renting. From what I can gather through records, the house was built in the 1950s. All seemed fine when we first moved in, except for the red room. On the top floor, there's a triangular attic-type space, painted completely red. It gave me terrible feelings of dread the moment I first walked into it. For months and months, I left it empty and would not venture into it. My mother, who is Christian but doesn't believe in ghosts, came to visit the house when we moved in. She walked into that room and said, "Oh, my goodness, you should consider having our pastor come see this and pray." She got the same feeling of dread that I had. Our bedroom is downstairs directly below that room. At night, I would hear walking and creaking up there, and I'd lie awake scared. Then one night, as I got into bed, I heard an echoey young female voice whisper my name directly into my left ear. My whole body went cold. I woke up my partner in a panic, but he sleepily shrugged it off, thinking I was dreaming. The next night, I heard the same voice coming from the next room say, "Hi." Since my partner didn't take any of this seriously, I tried my best to ignore these things. That is, until one of the scariest nights of my life occurred. I was upstairs in my office, which is directly adjacent to the red room. I was at my vanity taking off my makeup when the red room door slowly opened. Over the months, it had randomly opened quite often, which always scared me. But my partner insisted this was caused by a draft, even though there was no draft. I ignored the door. Then I heard loud footsteps downstairs walking through the house. Assuming it was my partner, I finished my skincare routine and went downstairs. The whole house was dark. I thought, that's weird. I just heard him walking around. I walked to the bathroom, and as I passed the kitchen, I saw a tall, dark, shadowy figure walk past me. Again, thinking it was my partner, I called out, "Hey, I'll be in bed in a minute." After I was done in the bathroom, I walked to our bedroom. Silence. He was fast asleep. In a panic, I shook him awake, saying, "How long have you been asleep? Weren't you in the kitchen a minute ago?" He sleepily said, "I've been asleep for like 2 hours," and rolled back over. I went completely silent and cold. I turned around and looked through the open bedroom door towards the kitchen and saw no one. Terrified, I climbed into the covers and tried to wake him to tell him we needed to check the house because someone was there. He didn't listen and said, "Go to sleep." Then, feeling an unnatural presence, I looked up and saw a tall figure standing directly next to my partner's side of the bed, towering over him. I let out a massive scream and grabbed him. This finally made him wake up. Confused, he asked, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I cried and said I saw the figure again standing over him. He jumped up and checked our whole room, under the bed too. He said, "There really is no one here." He's a skeptic, always has been, and he never was afraid of the house. Well, that changed after he got back in bed. We lay there silently, and as I finally started to feel less afraid and drift off to sleep, there came a loud bang, like someone dropped a brick. This sound came from the floor on his side of the bed, right where I'd seen the figure. He immediately was shaken from his sleep and screamed, "Okay, what the fuck?" I could tell he was afraid. I'd never seen him afraid before. I started to panic, crying, I told you there's something here." He immediately checked the entire house, making sure nobody had broken in. When he got back into bed, I said, "You know, that wasn't a person, right?" He didn't know how to respond. After that event, we moved our bedroom to another room across the house and turned the old one into a bonus room. Since moving into the other room, nothing has happened since. I wondered if the entity was feeding off of us easily because we were sleeping directly below the red room. Since then, the only occurrences have been the red room door opening or the doorknob rattling. I now rebuke whatever it is when this occurs. I am not the most religious, but I very loudly and firmly let it know it's not welcome and it needs to leave me alone. I refuse to let the spirit feed off my fear anymore.
You're listening to Disturbed. We'll be right back.
Seriously, Diane, was Colgate your secret to winning Best Smile back in high school?
Yep, and it still is. I even work overnight.
Huh?
Colgate's Optic White Overnight Whitening Pen works overnight. So after 1 week, I can show up confident and reunion ready.
And here I was bragging about my kids.
Colgate Optic White. Find it at all major retailers.
This episode is brought to you by PNC Bank, who believes some things in life should be boring, like banking, because boring is steady, pragmatic, responsible. You don't want your bank to be cool or sexy. Sexy is for red carpets, not banks. That's why PNC Bank strives to be boring with your money, so you can be happily fulfilled with your life. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring since 1865. Brilliantly boring since 1865 is a service mark of the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC.
Hello, and welcome back to the show. Our final story is narrated by Catarina Sveta from Reddit user The Real Side 91. 4-day staring competition with the man with a Glasgow smile.
My teenage years were interesting, to say the least. I had a big group of close-knit friends, and I'll be honest, we were little shits. Alcohol and other stuff was involved from age 11, so you can imagine the chaos. We all had bad situations at home and needed an escape. One friend whom I was particularly close to, Ryan, didn't have parents at home. His brother Ethan was his legal guardian, but never stuck around for long. Ryan basically had the house to himself. Ethan got a woman pregnant, and Their baby girl was born with multiple physical disabilities. You wouldn't trust Ethan with a pet stick insect, let alone an infant, and her mom wanted nothing to do with her. One day, a few weeks after she was born, the mom turned up with the baby and a bunch of baby stuff, handed her over, and never came back. From that moment on, Ryan raised her, and she became the center of our world. Even though she was Ryan's niece, we called her sister. There was always someone there to take her to every appointment, pick her up from school, play with her, etc. As a result, our main hangout spot became Ryan's house. We lived in a poor area with a high crime rate, and the area Ryan lived in was particularly bad. One day I was walking over to Ryan's house, and I passed a man who was about 35 and looked very disheveled and agitated. This describes about half the area's population, so I didn't think too much of it. By the time I reached Ryan's door, I couldn't see the man anymore, but I still felt eyes on me. I brushed off the sensation and went inside. A few hours later, several of our other friends had joined us at Ryan's place. We were all hanging out and relaxing when one of them called out, "Take a look at this nitty." That's British slang for an addict. We all went to the window to see who she was talking about. On the other side of the street was the man I'd noticed earlier, staring directly at us. None of us recognized him, so we were pretty sure he didn't live on this road. We laughed it off and went back to chatting, but we also double-checked all the locks before going to bed that night. At about 4 a.m, I woke to Ryan's sister crying. After checking on her and settling her back to sleep, I drowsily headed downstairs for some water. The front door was just a few feet away from the bottom step and had frosted glass panels at the top half. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I suddenly became aware of the outline of a face pressed against the glass. That same man had his face pushed up against the frosted glass and was staring right at me. I jumped, then reacted instinctively before thinking. I ran up to the door and banged on it as hard as I could while shouting and swearing at him. He ran away, and I checked the log again. By this time, everyone else was coming downstairs asking me what happened. I told them about the man, and we all looked at each other uneasily. Everyone headed back to bed, but this time Ryan and another friend went into his sister's room and slept on the floor just in case. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep, and I started to pointlessly clean the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man would come back. Ryan's living room had 2 glass doors that looked onto the garden. The curtain rod was broken, so nothing covered the doors. I never liked those glass doors, especially at night. That night I had the same feeling of eyes on me, but I couldn't see anything outside. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing over and jumping anytime I saw a bird perched on the fence outside. Finally, I decided to go back upstairs. I switched off the light, and the darkness let me see something I hadn't noticed before. A faint glow coming from the back of the garden. I acted as if I hadn't seen it, then crept upstairs to the bathroom. The window in the bathroom looked right over the garden. The top of the window was slightly ajar. Without turning on the light, I climbed on top of the toilet and sink to peek out the top of the window. I audibly gasped at what I saw. The same man sitting on an old chair at the back of the garden, smoking a cigarette. I realized he'd likely been there the whole time I was tidying downstairs. This wasn't the sort of area where you could go out and confront someone. Knives, guns, and machetes were common. His clothes were baggy, which meant I couldn't tell if he had any weapons on him. Calling the police was our very last resort. Just try explaining to law enforcement why a group of teens and a young child are alone without a parent or guardian in sight. I jumped down, woke up my friends, and told them the situation. 4 of my friends left with Ryan's sister to take her to someone else's house for safety. We hoped the man would get bored and leave, but we weren't taking any chances by keeping her in the house. As the sun rose, he was still in the garden. We assumed that, like most of the crazies, he was out of his head and easily intimidated. Armed with bats and kitchen knives, we walked into the living room, now bright enough to see the garden, and stared him down. At this point, there were about 15 of us. All the girls were punks or grunge, and the guys were all roadmen in tracksuits and balaclavas. We'd all been in enough fights to know how to handle ourselves, and we looked it too. At the sight of us, he went running, almost knocking the fence down trying to jump it. We thought we'd scared him off for good, but this was only the beginning. A few hours later, I heard a noise at the front of the house. It sounded like someone knocking into the bins. Hoping foxes hadn't tipped rubbish all over the road again, I looked out the window and saw the same disheveled man. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought 2 other equally disheveled men with him. I made eye contact with the first man, and it was the first time I'd really taken a good look at him in the light of day. His clothes were dirty, his brown hair was greasy, and his hands were covered in dirt. He smiled at me, and I noticed a detail I'd somehow missed before. He had a Glasgow smile. It felt like a scene from a horror movie. A Glasgow smile, for those who are unawares, a facial wound made from cutting the corners of a person's mouth towards the ears, leaving scars, like the Joker in The Dark Knight. I called out to my friends that he was back. Someone suggested we go outside and confront the 3 men, but that was quickly shut down. We could fight, but we weren't bulletproof, and we still didn't know if they were armed. We shouted out the window to them to leave, and to our surprise, they did. A few hours later, a friend went downstairs to get some food. She saw the same man and one of his minions standing in the back of the garden. She rushed back up to tell us, and as we hurried down the stairs, we all jumped at the sight of the other minion's face pressed up against the front door. Still not wanting to call the police, we decided we might as well just watch him. We all kept bats and kitchen knives with us and sat between the living room and the front door just staring. We stayed like that all night, taking turns sleeping. At some point, the man at the front door joined his friends in the garden. We considered making a run for it, but there were too many of us to get out before they'd jump back over the fence and meet us at the front door. For 4 days, we just sat there, taking turns sleeping. The men did the same. We all just stared at each other. Every now and again, one of the men would press their face up against the glass and bang on the door while making strange noises. We'd all jump up and run to the door and bang on it from our side. This seemed to make them stop. A couple times, 1 or 2 of us snuck away and boiled water in the kettle before sneaking it upstairs and going into the bathroom. The others would entice the men closer to the door. It wasn't hard if you went near the door, so would they. When they were close enough, the ones in the bathroom would pour the boiling water out the window. It hit the men more than once, and they'd jump back and swear at us. But they stayed where they were. Occasionally, one of the minions would leave, but he'd always return with cigarettes, food, alcohol, or drugs. On the second night, it just so happened that all the boys in our group were asleep. I was exhausted. I'd barely slept. In fact, I'd barely broken eye contact with the men. The men whispered among themselves, then pulled down their trousers. I'll skip over what happened next. Some of the most vile things I've ever seen. But I didn't avert my eyes. Not once. I wasn't looking at the men, I was looking at the trousers. Specifically the black pieces of metal that were somewhat visible. I couldn't make out what they were. Fake guns are just as common as real ones, and I know a fake gun when I see it.
but all I could see were bits of black metal. The minions didn't seem like they were all there. The eyes were constantly confused. They rather looked like a strong breeze would knock them off their feet. It was the original man with the Glasgow smile I was worried about. He was mental, don't get me wrong, but he was with it. He was aware. The only thing that seemed to unnerve the men was one of my friends. She was quite tall and a complete punk with thick, curly hair dyed red. But it wasn't her style that seemed to distress them, it was her face. She was the only other person I'd ever seen with a Glasgow smile. Only she also had triangles above and below both eyes like a clown and smaller scars across the rest of her face. Some of these were caused by an attack when she was younger. Others were caused by her own mental health issues. The man with the Glasgow smile wouldn't look at her, not once. He'd look anywhere but at her face. On the fourth day at about 7 p.m., we heard police sirens. We all looked at each other as though one of us had managed to call the police without anyone else noticing, but the police weren't there for us. They were there for a house down the road. No one was surprised. Everyone, even the 96-year-old lady 2 doors down, knew that house as the pharmacy. Riot vans and armed police turned up to raid the place, but the 3 men assumed they were coming for them. The 2 minions took off running, but the first man, he lingered for a moment. Everyone else's attention had turned to the front door, distracted by the blaring sirens and flashing lights. But I didn't take my eyes off him. He smiled at me and pulled his gun out, pointing it right at me through the glass door. He made a shooting gesture while mouthing the word, pew. Then he took off running. We never saw the men again, and I'll never know why they targeted us. Thank God we didn't go outside to confront them. Like I said, I know a fake gun when I see one, but I know a real one too. And his was real.
Want more Disturbed? Check out our Patreon for member-exclusive content, early merch access, and other cool perks. I'm your host, Doug Bailey, and this has been Disturbed, a production of Killer Podcasts and part of the Evergreen Network. For more paranormal and true crime shows, visit killerpodcasts.com. Follow our social channels at Disturbed Podcast on Instagram or Disturbed_pod on Twitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and reviewing on your favorite listening platform. Share your own true horror story at disturbedpodcast.com. Music by Epidemic Sound and by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Our producers are Noah Fouts and Elizabeth Flood. Our audio engineer is Nathan Corson. Executive producers Bridget Coyne and Gerardo Orlando. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande, the host of True Crime Psychology and Personality. On my podcast, I explore and explain the pathology behind some of the most horrendous crimes and those who commit them. We discuss topics like narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy, and antisocial personality disorder from a scientifically informed perspective. What is a narcissist? How do you spot a sociopath? What signs can you look for to protect yourself from these dangerous personalities? It's not just about the stories, but also the science and psychology behind them. So if you're interested in true crime or mental health, I'd encourage you to give my show a listen wherever you get podcasts.